Dear listeners, today I'll read a story today. Have a seat. I'm now opening the book. Let's start. Dear Sir, I hope this letter finds you well. Like many others, I felt compelled to write and share my story with you. My name is Jerry, and what I'm about to tell you happened a long time ago, but it haunts me to this day. It all began when I worked at a small bakery on the side of a busy road. Our bread was famous in the area, and we'd get customers even late at night. Business was good, too good to close early, so I'd often find myself working well past midnight. The bakery was like a second home. My boss was kind, sometimes even giving us bonuses, especially around Christmas. It made the long hours and late nights easier to handle. But it was one of those late nights when things started getting strange. Around 1 a.m., I noticed a man. He stood outside the bakery, leaning against a streetlight. His eyes, though not focused on anything in particular, seemed distant. I ignored him at first, thinking he was just waiting for someone or resting. But something about him felt off. He was there every night, always in the same clothes, always staring at the bakery as if waiting for something. One night, feeling uneasy, I stepped outside to talk to him. He didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just stared blankly at the bakery's window, his gaze unnerving. I tried to shake it off, but when I went back inside, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The next night, he was there again. This time I noticed something different. His gaze was locked on the hopia, the sweet pastries we sold. His eyes seemed hungry, desperate. I felt a pang of sympathy. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. So without a second thought, I grabbed 5 pieces of hopia, went outside, and handed them to him. Here, take these. I'll pay for them, he said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond, didn't even move. I was about to say something else when just like that he vanished. One moment he was there and the next gone. I blinked in disbelief, looking around, but there was no sign of him. Then I noticed the hopia, still lying on the ground, untouched. A chill ran down my spine. Later that night, while having coffee with my coworker Jonathan, he brought up something that made my blood run cold. He told me that strange things had been happening in the bakery, things that couldn't be explained. He swore he had seen a ghost, the spirit of a man who had been hit by a truck right outside our bakery. Jonathan claimed the man had stolen bread from our bakery just moments before his death. I stayed silent, listening to his story, the pieces slowly falling into place. Jonathan left work early every day, so he hadn't seen the man like I had, but the way he described the accident, it was too similar. Could it be the same man? The one who stared at the bakery every night? I shook off the thought, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But the nights grew colder, and so did my resolve. The man kept appearing, his presence growing more and more unnerving. I felt as though he was watching me, silently waiting for something I couldn't understand. Then one night, during another blackout, everything came crashing down. It was past 1 a.m., the bakery illuminated only by the soft flicker of a candle. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, suffocating. That's when I felt it. A cold breeze on the back of my neck, even though all the doors were closed. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. And there he was, standing just inches away from me. His face was pale, almost ghostly, his eyes sunken and lifeless. Blood dripped slowly from a gash on his forehead, staining the ground beneath him. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I reached out instinctively to touch him, but my hand passed right through his body, as if he were made of air. It was then that I knew. This wasn't a man. This was something else, something not of this world. The ghost vanished again, disappearing like a bubble that popped and left no trace. The lights flickered back on after a few moments, but the chill in the air lingered. My heart was pounding, and as I scanned the room, I saw him once more. The ghost was standing by the display of hopia, just like before. But this time, I noticed something even more disturbing. People walking by him didn't seem to see him. They passed right through him, as if he weren't there at all. That realization filled me with dread. From that moment on, fear clung to me like a shadow. Every night, as I walked home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I'd hear soft footsteps behind me, and knocks on the door would echo through my house, even though I lived alone. These noises were never there before, but now they happened every night, right around 1 a.m. At the bakery, I tried to ignore the ghost. He would appear at the same time, always watching me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of his face, disturbingly close to mine, his hollow eyes staring right through me. But I never let him see how terrified I was. I refused to acknowledge him, hoping he would eventually go away. The next day, I told Jonathan everything. He listened intently and confirmed my worst fear. The ghost I had been seeing was indeed the same man who had been hit by the truck outside the bakery. Jonathan advised me to stop paying attention to the spirit, to act as if he wasn't there. If you ignore him, Jonathan said, he might just leave you alone. He was right. The ghostly figure was the same man who had stolen bread from our bakery and died in the accident. One night, Jonathan stayed with me to work overtime. That night, the ghost didn't show up. From that point on, he never appeared again. It was as if ignoring him had made him give up. I was relieved. Life returned to normal. My job at the bakery became easier, and even Jonathan started working the late shift with me. We both believed that the ghost had finally surrendered, having failed to get my attention. He disappeared and peace returned to the bakery. I was relieved. Life returned to normal. My job at the bakery became easier, and even Jonathan started working the late shift with me. We both believed that the ghost had finally surrendered, having failed to get my attention. He disappeared and peace returned to the bakery. After the ghost stopped appearing at the bakery, I thought things were finally behind me. But peace never lasts long in stories like this. I met Carlo a few weeks later through Jonathan. He was quiet, thoughtful. Someone who had clearly lived through more than he was willing to admit. But one evening, while we were cleaning up the back room, Carlo opened up to me about something horrifying from his past. He told me about a disturbing incident in his old neighborhood. There had been a large feast, something everyone in the area attended except for Carlo's family. They had been warned, though no one outside their household ever knew the truth. People thought they just chose not to come. But according to Carlo, that gathering had a dark, sinister purpose. The guests they had unknowingly eaten human flesh. No one at the party knew. Only Carlo's family had stayed away, and only they knew what really happened. Carlo was only a teenager when the hauntings began. It started small, a flicker of shadow in the hallway, whispers that didn't belong to anyone in the house. But eventually, the visits became impossible to ignore. Every night, Carlo would see the ghost of his father's friend standing at the foot of his bed. The spirit was pale, gaunt, his eyes hollow with betrayal, his mouth twisted in silent screams. He would just stand there, staring, never blinking, never speaking, just waiting. Carlo tried to ignore him. He buried his face in the pillows, pulled the blankets over his head, prayed, anything to make the nightmare go away. But it only made things worse. One night he saw the ghost following him down the hallway. The same man, with skin so gray it looked lifeless, hovered inches above the ground. Carlo said he never told his father because he was afraid his dad wouldn't believe him. Or worse, that talking about it might bring something even darker. The ghost never let him sleep. He would appear every night by the closet, behind the curtains, or sometimes just inches away from Carlo's face. One time the ghost was so close that Carlo could feel the icy breath against his cheek. His body froze. He wanted to scream, but his voice had vanished. Then came the worst night. Carlo had been home alone. It was nearly midnight. The house was dead silent and the lights kept flickering. He thought it was just the power acting up, until he looked up from the couch and saw the ghost levitating in the middle of the living room, staring straight at him. Carlo ran. He crawled under the dining table, shaking uncontrollably as he watched the ghost slowly descend toward the floor. Then, the spirit whistled, a long, low, eerie tune that echoed in Carlo's ears. And that was the last thing he remembered. He passed out from fear. When he woke up, his father was standing over him, confused and terrified. That was the breaking point. Carlo finally told him everything. The ghost, the visions, the whistling, the night terrors. And that the spirit wasn't just haunting. It was demanding justice. Haunted by guilt and fear, Carlo's father did something he had avoided for years. He spoke up. He went to the police, exposing everything that had happened in that cursed neighborhood. There was a long investigation, a public trial, and finally, those who had committed the atrocity were sent to prison. After that, the ghost never came back. Carlo told me this with a faraway look in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure whether the haunting had truly ended or if the spirit was simply waiting for a reason to return. He never really found peace, and honestly, neither did I. Because after hearing his story, I started noticing strange things again. In the corners of my vision, in the mirrors at the bakery, in the quiet moments just before I fell asleep. I swear I saw something, someone, watching. I hadn't thought much about ghosts after what Carlo told me. I thought I'd moved on, until I met Aisha. She was a young woman I shared a hospital room with for a few days after a minor outpatient procedure. Quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly pale. At first she didn't say much, just stared at the ceiling or out the window, lost in thought. But one night, as the lights dimmed and the hallway outside our room emptied into silence, she leaned toward me and asked, Have you ever fallen in love with someone who might not be real? I didn't know what she meant until she told me her story. A few months before, Aisha had been confined to the same hospital for several weeks. A rare illness had forced her into long, painful treatments and frequent overnight stays. On one of her final nights there, she asked her parents if she could walk back to her room on her own after some tests. They agreed, relieved that she was finally strong enough to move around with her IV stand in tow. As she reached the door to her room, she noticed a man inside, a doctor, dressed in a clean white coat. He stood by her bed, flipping through a clipboard. But something about him was off. Then just as suddenly as she'd seen him, he was gone. No door opened, no footsteps. 1 second he was there, the next the room was empty. Aisha tried to brush it off. Maybe she'd imagined him, maybe she was just tired. But the next night he came back, always at night, always standing by the window. At first she thought he was just a particularly silent doctor, maybe someone who was checking in late on his patients. But night after night, he returned. Same time, same spot. He never spoke. He barely moved. And the more she saw him, the more Aisha felt her fear melt into something stranger. Curiosity, affection, and eventually, a quiet, trembling kind of love. She called him Dr. Ivan. Over time, Ivan began responding to her. At first, only with his eyes. Then, with brief answers. Then quiet conversations. She told him her secrets, her dreams, her fears. They spent hours together. She didn't tell her parents. She knew they wouldn't understand. But Aisha began to notice strange things. Dr. Ivan always wore the same clothes. His skin remained deathly pale. And despite all her attempts, he never let her touch him. One night, overcome with affection, she reached for his hand. It was ice cold, not just cold, frozen. Ivan pulled away, his face flashing with something between pain and rage. She had never seen him angry before. But in that moment, his eyes darkened with something inhuman. The nurse frowned. Who? Dr. Ivan. Tall, white coat, black hair. He visits me every night. He works the overnight shift, I think. The nurse's face went down. There's no Dr. Ivan here, she said. Not anymore. Aisha didn't understand. She insisted, described his appearance, his voice, the way he stood by the window. The nurse shook her head slowly, visibly disturbed. Sweetheart, she said gently, Dr. Ivan died 2 years ago. Car accident, just outside the hospital parking garage. He bled out on the way to the ER. Aisha froze. She remembered what Carlo had told me about spirits that returned when justice hadn't been served, or when the dead simply refused to be forgotten. And yet, this wasn't like that. Ivan hadn't asked for justice. He hadn't screamed or wailed or demanded anything. He just stayed. When I turned over, my heart stopped. There was a man by the window, pale, still, wearing a white coat, and he was staring straight at me. That night, as I watched the figure by the hospital window, Dr. Ivan, pale as bone and motionless, I felt something change in the air. He wasn't just a memory. He was still there. And I realized something even more terrifying. He wasn't looking at Aisha. He was looking at me. From that moment on, things unraveled faster than I could keep track of. Aisha later told me she had once seen Ivan walk through a solid door, just passed right through it. No sound, no hesitation. That was when she finally accepted what she'd been too afraid to admit. Ivan wasn't alive. She confronted him that same night. She shouted, cried, demanded the truth. Ivan didn't even try to deny it. In his cold, empty voice, he admitted that he had died years ago, that he had taken his own life in the very room where Aisha had stayed. He had been heartbroken, abandoned, spiraling into madness after a brutal breakup he never recovered from. And since then, he had wandered the corridors of the hospital, searching for someone, anyone, to fill the void. Aisha had been that someone. At first she was heartbroken. She truly loved him. But the more she tried to move on, the darker he became. He started appearing not just in the hospital, but in her bedroom at night. He would stand over her while she slept. If she opened her eyes, he'd vanish, or worse, stare silently, his expression twisted in rage. Then came the threats. He told her they were meant to be together, that even death couldn't keep them apart, that he'd never stop appearing, never stop watching. When she told him she didn't want to see him anymore, he screamed at her, his face distorting, his eyes black with hate. One night, he chased her through her own house, his feet gliding inches above the ground, his whispers slicing through the silence like broken glass. She nearly fell down the stairs trying to escape him. Desperate, Aisha confessed everything to her parents. They turned to a spiritual healer who helped close her third eye, cutting off her ability to see the dead. Since then, Ivan no longer appeared, but Aisha told me she still felt him in the cold breeze that passed through a closed room, in the way mirrors fogged without reason, in the weight of invisible eyes watching from the dark. Curious, Aisha later returned to the hospital, searching for records about Ivan. What she found devastated her. His real name was Ethan Rivera, not Ivan. He had been a resident England who had spiraled into depression after a failed engagement. He died by suicide inside his hospital dorm room after weeks of isolation and mental collapse. Some said they had heard violin music in the hospital that night, sad, trembling notes in the dark. Violin music. That detail haunted me because it echoed another story I had once heard, one that felt eerily similar. A young man named Peter Coleman, a close friend of my father, had been a violinist at his university. He was charismatic, brilliant, beloved by everyone on campus. But behind his radiant smile was a deep, unspoken sadness. My father always suspected it had something to do with his family. Peter's parents never showed up to any of his performances. He always looked for them in the crowd and always left alone. He poured all his pain into the strings of his violin. Students in the dorms said his late-night practice helped them fall asleep. The melody would drift down the halls like a lullaby. Soft, mournful, comforting. My father said Peter's music was haunting in the most beautiful way. But then, something unimaginable happened. On the night of the campus music competition, Peter never showed up. Everyone assumed he was running late. But after the event ended and he still hadn't arrived, my father went to check on him. He found Peter's body collapsed on the dorm floor, his violin clutched tightly in his lifeless hands. The entire university went into mourning. Peter's death devastated the school. Vigils were held. Flowers were left outside his room. But the strangest part came 2 weeks later. At exactly 10 p.m., Peter's usual practice time, the haunting sound of a violin echoed across the campus. At first, students thought it was someone paying tribute, but then they realized it was him. The exact notes Peter used to play, the same haunting rhythm, from the same room. But Peter's dorm had been locked since the night of his death. When campus security opened the room to investigate, they found it empty. No instruments, no stereo. Just silence and a chill in the air. And the next night, it happened again. And the next. Some students claimed they saw a figure through the cracked curtain. Peter, standing with his back to the window, swaying gently with his violin. Others refused to walk past the dorm at night, saying they heard footsteps behind them that stopped when they turned around. My father eventually transferred campuses, but Peter's music, they say, never stopped. After everything I've seen with Aisha, after everything I've experienced at the bakery with Carlo, and now this, I'm starting to think these spirits find each other. And maybe, just maybe, they're all being drawn to me. After the chilling events surrounding Dr. Ivan and Peter the violinist, I thought I had finally reached the edge of what reality could hold. But the strange thing about darkness is, once it finds you, it never lets go. My father used to speak often about Peter, the gifted violinist who had taken his own life in the old university dormitory. Years later, people still whispered about the echoing notes heard at 10 p.m. Always the same song, the same rhythm, the final melody Peter had played the night he died. And now, even students from newer generations were reporting encounters. One girl, Mira, told my dad she'd once seen Peter's old dorm door creak open by itself, only to slam shut seconds later with no one inside. Another swore she saw a man in white pacing the hallway near midnight, barefoot, his figure slightly blurred as if he didn't belong in this world. The most terrifying encounter happened during a university-wide music contest held in the campus gymnasium. It was around 10 p.m., of course. A young man climbed the stage, violin in hand, ready to perform. The crowd applauded politely, but before he could even lift his bow, a strange sound echoed through the gym. Violin music. But he hadn't begun playing. Everyone froze. Then someone pointed. Behind the boy, at the back of the stage, there were footsteps. The distinct clack of leather shoes scraping against the gym's polished concrete floor. The sound wasn't coming from the boy. It was following him. And then the lights flickered. Panic took over. Screaming, students poured out of the gymnasium, some tripping over chairs and each other. Because everyone knew no one else was supposed to be on that stage, and no one had brought another violin. That sound, the one that chased them out, was unmistakable. It was Peter. Later, people speculated that Peter's ghost didn't want to harm anyone. He just wanted to be remembered, wanted to be seen. After years of being overlooked by his family, of performing to empty seats, his ghost craved an audience that would never leave. But not all spirits are born from loneliness. Some come from love twisted into something darker. Which brings me to a boy named Casper, a delivery rider who once shared with me the most painful story I'd ever heard. He told me it wasn't really a ghost story, but I disagreed. It happened in the summer of 2020, during a time when fear and isolation blanketed the world. Casper was the eldest of 5 siblings, but he was especially close to the youngest, Leo, a bright-eyed little boy with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Leo was his shadow, always asking when he'd be home from deliveries, always waiting at the door. Everyone teased Casper, saying he played favorites, but he didn't care. He loved them all, but Leo was different. One evening, Casper came home late after a long route. He walked into a house wrapped in silence. No TV, no laughter, no sound of little feet running to greet him. Only his mother's red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. "Where's Leo?" he asked. No one answered, until his mother crumbled to the floor, sobbing, and whispered, "We can't find him." Casper dropped everything. Despite being exhausted, he jumped on his motorbike and began scouring every corner of the neighborhood. He shouted Leo's name into the night, asked every stranger, every neighbor. No one had seen him. Some just lowered their eyes in guilt, others in fear, because in their town there were rumors. Whispers of children disappearing. People said it was just paranoia. Others claimed something worse, dark figures that moved in the woods at the edge of town, vans that passed too slowly, too quietly, always with windows blacked out. Casper didn't believe in monsters until that night. He cried as he drove, circling the streets again and again. Hours passed. His gas tank dwindled. Still no Leo. And then something strange happened. As he passed the abandoned church on the edge of the village, his headlight flickered, and in that brief second of darkness, he saw someone in the middle of the road. A boy, dressed in white. Casper slammed the brakes, heart hammering. But when the light steadied, there was no one there, just silence, and the soft, unmistakable sound of a child's laugh echoing from the trees. It sounded like Leo. Casper got off the bike and ran into the woods, flashlight trembling in his hand, calling his brother's name again and again. But the deeper he went, the colder it got. The sound of Leo's laugh grew more distant, more distorted, until it stopped altogether. Then came the whisper, "You're too late." Casper turned, but there was nothing there. He never found a Leo that night, or any night after. The body was never recovered. Some said he'd been taken. Others claimed he'd wandered too far and fallen somewhere no one could reach. But Casper believed something else. That what he saw in the woods that night wasn't Leo, at least not anymore. That sometimes grief leaves behind a shadow strong enough to mimic the one you lost. A cruel echo that knows exactly what voice to use. And some nights, when he's out delivering parcels in the rain, Casper still hears small footsteps behind him. A giggle in the dark, or sees a boy, barefoot in white, standing just behind the next street lamp, waiting. After Leo vanished, something inside Casper shattered. He stopped speaking to his parents, blaming them in the quiet bitterness that only grief can breed. They should have watched Leo more closely. He was only 4, too young to disappear so completely. Every delivery became an excuse to search. Every alleyway, every village, every unfamiliar face. Casper scanned them all, hoping to see that small boy again. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. But Leo never came home, and then came the dreams. At first they were just whispers, soft cries that echoed in sleep. But soon they grew clearer. Kuya, help me. Leo's voice, desperate and trembling, calling out from some unseen place. Casper woke in cold sweats, screaming into the night with no one to answer. Until one evening, on a new delivery route deep in the countryside, something happened. It was a remote village, barely lit by flickering street lamps and a newly built bridge that spanned a wide, sluggish river. It was nearly midnight. Casper, as usual, was the last rider on the road. The sky was black. The bridge was empty at first. Then he saw them, children, 5 of them standing silently in the middle of the bridge. He slowed his motorbike, confused and concerned. "Hey," he called, "it's not safe here, go home." But none of them turned. He called again, louder. Still nothing. Then one child, smaller than the rest, tilted his head slightly, enough for Casper to see half of his face illuminated by the bike's headlight. It was Leo. Casper's heart stopped. He killed the engine, leapt off the bike and ran toward them. "Leo!" he screamed. "Leo, it's me!" He watched them carefully, realizing something horrifying. They weren't walking. They were floating, their feet inches above the pavement. Their clothes didn't flutter in the breeze. Their heads didn't move. They were like broken puppets suspended in the air. Casper gunned the engine and sped away, cold air clutching his back like a pair of invisible arms. He didn't dare look over his shoulder. He couldn't, but it followed him home. That night, just after 3 a.m., Casper awoke to the sound of sobbing. It came from the darkest corner of his bedroom, a child's voice. He recognized it instantly. Leo. He switched on the light. There was nothing. No sound. No shadow. Just the hum of the fan. He laid back down, trembling. But moments later, a whisper came, closer this time. "Kuya!" Casper shot up, and there he was, Leo, standing at the foot of his bed. But this was not the boy Casper remembered. His clothes were stained with blood, his skin pale, the corners of his eyes ringed with bruised shadows. His mouth hung open as if mid-cry, but no sound came out. Then he vanished. Casper didn't sleep that night, and he didn't speak about it to anyone until the visions became too much. One morning, while delivering parcels near the same bridge, he saw them again, Leo and 4 other children, facing away, lined up at the edge of the bridge as if waiting for something. Casper screamed his brother's name, dropping his parcels, sprinting toward them. But as he reached out, his hand passed through Leo's body like mist. His fingers went numb with cold. Leo turned his head slowly one last time. There was no anger in his face, no fear, only sorrow. And then he faded into the morning fog. Later that week, an old woman in the village stopped Casper to tell him something he would never forget. "That bridge is cursed," she said. "They say spirits of children who were taken, or who died alone. They linger there, not to scare, just to be seen, to be remembered. That's when Casper finally understood. Leo wasn't trying to haunt him. He was trying to come home, but he couldn't. Casper eventually told his parents everything. There were tears, regret, silence. No one ever found out what really happened to Leo. No suspects, no clues, not even a shoe. Only stories, whispers.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Also, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you didn't, and any constructive feedback you have. Love to hear from you. Your support and input help make future videos even better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.